Cool. Hi everyone, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Kate Cruickshank, and I am from Montreal and Watts. We're a law firm, and we are based in Auckland and Wellington. And the reason why I'm here today, and I'll get Lauren to introduce herself in a second, is that we do a lot of work in the creative sector space. So I do a lot of work in film production, film financing, and also on a bit of the investment side in the gaming sector. So, and Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lauren Archer, so I'm from Montrealison as well. I sit more on the corporate and structuring side in terms of how you set up your business and how you can set up your arrangements with your co-founders and other people and see that through to get hopefully a return at the end of it.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about how you set your studio up or your particular project up for success from the outset. And then also how you could potentially turn your game into a film down the line. So we're going to kick off, Lauren's going to kick off on some of the structuring side of things. We'll have time for questions at the end, but equally if you do have a question along the way, do feel free to raise your hand and we're happy to have a chat along the way too.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. So look, when you're starting out, you want to put in place some sort of structure that can see you hopefully through to the end or through to a point where you're getting your bigger investors in with you. So at the outset, the key things to keep in mind is that you want something that is simple, a simple structure that is tax efficient. No one likes paying tax. You also want it to be flexible and scalable, which means that you can have other people coming in over time, and it can be it can adapt to allow for that. And also as part of that is asset protection, and there's two elements to that. It's also about the people that are involved in it protecting their personal assets from what they're doing as part of it, which is where limited liability and things like that comes in, but there's also protecting your assets that you're creating as part of your venture and putting those in the right place. So there's two key structures that we use in New Zealand. One of them will be familiar, I'm sure, to everyone, which is a company. So you see something that's, ABC Limited, and that means it's a limited liability company. It's simple, it's well understood by everybody, as opposed to a limited partnership, which is a more recent addition to the New Zealand landscape, but is a very good option in some circumstances because it's like a company, but a bit different. It is tax transparent, so that's one of the key reasons that people look to a limited partnership, because it means that profits and losses can flow through to the limited partners, which are sort of the equivalent of a shareholder in a company. So I won't focus too much on limited partnerships, but that is something to keep in mind if you have a group of people that you're working with and some of them are overseas, or if you're expecting to make significant losses, it can be a really good option to talk to an advisor about. So I'll go on to the next one. So what we would typically see, if you're doing a company, you have your holdco, which is your limited company. You have your founder shareholders who can be individually shareholders, and you might have investors that come in later on as shareholders. You see that we've got a holdco and an opco. The reason that we would sometimes suggest that is because you can have different assets in different entities, which means if you've got the opco that's going out and entering into various contracts and doing all of the BAU kind of everyday stuff for your venture, you can keep your valuable IP assets separate from that by having them up at the holdco level and just giving a right or a license down to the company below for that.
That would mean that if something happened to, and what we mean by opco is your operating company, if something happened to that company that's not affecting your key assets, which is your IP, which is sitting separate, up in a different company structure. So that's why you would think about doing that.
Yeah. So
it's corporate structure. So how do I structure my team, the people I'm working with?
Yep. So that's a really important point. And one thing that we would say is really important to get right from the outset and to think about is the people that are around you and that are helping out with your venture. What buckets do they fall in terms of what rights they have, what your commitments are to them? So maybe at the start, it might be a few of your friends or whoever getting together to create something and you haven't put a formal structure in place. When you're putting it in, you want to make a distinction. Who are the people that are in it with you, and that they are your co-founders and you guys are sharing in it either equally or in some sort of proportion that you have all agreed to. And then who are the people that sit outside that bucket and should be treated as employees or contractors and are subject to a different sort of reward process. And it's important to get that right at the start and make sure that you've got your documentation around that right, because it will impact your IP later on and potentially the value of your IP, which Kate will get onto in terms of getting your arrangements right for the future, so you don't have people coming back to you in the future being disgruntled, feeling like they might have actually contributed to part of what you've created and should have some sort of reward as a result. And one of the key things there is there's a distinction in New Zealand law between the way IP rights relating to employees and non-employees are treated. So at the outset, your employees, the general position is that work that they have created as part of their employment arrangement with you will go to the employer, so your company, or whatever structure you've put in place. Whereas with contractors, that might not necessarily be the case, and it's really important to document as between them and your entity what the arrangement is, what IP rights they actually have, if any, and to get a release of those rights, which Kate will go into much more detail on that stuff going on when she carries on. And I've put out to the side freelancers. I would sometimes also think about putting in there friends and family, or people that sort of come and help out for a couple of days or do something like that. Like having something that is just a simple document that sets out what the arrangements are with those sorts of people that you can just do on the day could be really useful as well. And that, again, will be part of what Kate will talk to you about.
So if I'm in my early stage of my studio journey and I've got like no cash flow and I'm working hard on developing my game, what options do I have to incentivise my team, Lauren?
Yeah. So at the start, you're probably cash poor. You're doing it for the hopeful reward at the end, the love of it, the passion. You want to create your game or create your movie from your game. So you need to find a way to actually incentivise the people that you are engaging to help you with it in a non-immediate cash kind of way. So that's going back to where we talked about the founders and what their rights are. They might be involved in decision making around what your organisation is doing, and what decisions you have to make together, or what decisions perhaps the lead person might be entitled to make. So you would often have a shareholders agreement between your founder shareholders, and Kate and I have actually done a webinar on that, which will be out for you.
With the NZGDA, so it'll be on your website.
Yep, talking about what sort of things to think about in terms of those governance arrangements. But going back to incentivising your team, there are different ways that you can do this and different things that you can offer. So cash is obviously, that's a great thing. Everyone loves to get a bit of money. The other option is equity, and by equity we mean a share in the entity or the ultimate reward that the broader organisation gets when you actually commercialise your game or your film. So at the top left, discretionary bonus, so you can give people money and that will be great. Non-discretionary, that is more likely where there are certain hurdles or things like that need to be met in order for someone to get that cash reward. But again, at the start, you're not going to necessarily have cash to be able to actually do that, which is where we get into more of the rewards that are linked to the ultimate return. And some of the ways that you can do that is, you can give people shares, obviously, but again, you want to think about what governance rights you're giving associated with that. So you might be giving them a share that doesn't actually entitle them to anything. Up on the top right-hand side is an increasingly common option that is selected amongst creative and tech organisations, which is a phantom share scheme. So what that does, it doesn't actually formally give anybody an actual share as a shareholder of the company or rights to shares. What it does do is give them an economic right to a particular return based on what the ultimate return actually is for the broader entity. So that means that they can still share in the upside without having to go through all the hassle and documentation and additional things that come when you're actually issuing true shares or rights to shares. So, where are we?
Okay.
So
fast forward, the game is shipped, we're out there, it's a hit, yes, awesome. Let's talk about now how you can adapt your game into a film in the NZ landscape. But what we're going to do first is we're going to recap on IP. I don't know how much people know in the audience, so we're going to go back to kind of IP 101 here. So when we talk about IP in terms of your game, we're talking about all the creative and technical elements that make up your game. So that include copyright, and that's in your code, in your art, in your music, and dialogue that goes in the game, trademarks for your game's name and branding, and publicity rights, especially if you're using real-world likenesses or voices. So the game isn't just one piece of IP, it's a bundle of rights, and each of those need to be properly owned or licensed. So for our purposes today, we're going to focus really more on copyright as the core IP regime for creative content in New Zealand. And so under New Zealand law, copyright is an original work, so that's your code, literary works, artistic works, music and films. And for games, that means your game will have multiple layers of copyright involved. So your code will be copyright, and that will be usually owned whoever made the code, and that's why it's important, as Lauren said, you need to know who made it at the outset, whether it was an employee, in which case you as the employer will own it, so good, happy days, that's the default position. If you brought in a whole lot of contractors or freelancers to do the code, get the code underway and get moving quickly, you need to have made sure that under those terms that you've got that IP or the copyright assigned to you as a studio owner. All your visual and audio assets, again, there's going to be copyright in those, and the story, the dialogue, and the characters. And even if you've got kind of really well recognised characters who are sufficiently original, who also appear outside the game, they could also have their own copyright in that too. So basically the point is there's a whole lot of bundle of rights, and you kind of need to track it through and make sure you've got all the rights sitting as you as a game development studio. The reason for this is because in New Zealand, as the copyright owner of the IP in the game, I then have the exclusive right to make any adaptation of my IP in the game. So it means I hold the rights to make anything that's based on the game. A derivative work is what we call it. So if someone wants to come and and make a movie based on my game, or even like the characters or the storyline or kind of the visual vibe of the game, then I only have the exclusive right to do that, and they need to come and get their permission to do that from me, and on the terms that I agree to. So for me to have that leverage though, I need to have a complete chain of title, and that's what we call by chain of title. It's used in the film sector a lot too, but also in the gaming sector. It just means, as we say, you need to document and clearly identify your ownership or rights to use all of the different layers of IP in your game. And this is kind of critical. Like, think of it like as your house. Like, if you can't prove you own the title to your house, you can't sell it. So if I can't prove that I own all of the rights in my game, I'm not going to be able to bring on board a producer to say, hey, come and make a film based on my game, because I can't guarantee the underlying IP. And commonly we'll see a few breaks in our chain of title. Most common are like those missing agreements from the early days of the game development, potentially kind of those rights that you might not think about. So we also have moral rights in New Zealand, which can't be just assigned. So if you have got your usual clause in your agreement that says to your contractor or your freelancer, hey, anything you create that I'm paying you for on my game, I own that IP. But that won't transfer these moral rights that we have, which are codified into law, and they have to waive those for your benefit. So there's a few things you've got to do when you're dealing with your team and making sure you're kind of perfecting that chain of title. The other area where we see where there's breaks in the chain is using stock assets without proper licenses, using open source code that's incompatible with the open source licenses, and also just using that altogether, and music rights, forgetting to make sure you're licensing those correctly too. And if your game allows user-generated content, making sure there's clear terms as to who owns the content generated as well. So basically, you've got to go through this kind of checklist, I guess. If this is something you want to do, you need to do kind of IP DD, your due diligence on your IP up front. And you need to kind of double check every element. And it's way better to do that at the outset before you even get too far down the line, because if you get too far down the line, you're going to lose a bit of leverage if you have to go back and fix up these things. And what we would often see is a contributor's claim or quick claim being used. This is basically, if you haven't done it at the outset, you can go back and get them to sign a document to say, hey, yeah, I worked on that, I agree, all my IP's gone, anything that I may have owned, you now own. I also waive all my moral rights, and I also agree not to bring a claim down the line. And that is really helpful, because that protects your ability to then sell your adaptation rights to a film producer.
So, Kate, if I've got my chain of title sorted, how do I then engage with a producer?
So there's kind of two ways, and one way is way more common than the other. So I'm going to spend most of the time talking about the one way that's way more common. And that's basically, you can option your rights to adapt your game into a film, or you can just license them outright. And it's way more common to go down to the option route. So what does this mean, an option? So Lauren, if you're the game developer and I'm the film producer and I have a film production company, in the option agreement, Lauren as a game developer is going to give me the exclusive right to purchase the film rights within a certain period of time. And in exchange, I'm going to pay Lauren an option fee, which will often be non-refundable, for this holding right. It's not a right for me to actually go and do it yet. It's a right for me to have the exclusive nature. Basically, you can't go and give these rights to anyone else, just for a period of time while I go and investigate to see whether I can get my project to make this film off the ground. And if I don't exercise the option, or I don't go ahead with the project within a particular time frame, then the option lapses and Lauren's free to go and do the same deal with someone else. And during that option period, me as a film producer, I'll be allowed to go and pitch the project to film studios, networks, other financiers. I'll be able to develop scripts or treatments based off the game. I'll be able to potentially attach talent to the project, a director, key cast, whatever I feel like I might want to do to secure some financing or some funding for the film. But these rights are all conditional on me then actually exercising the option and paying Lauren a purchase price to actually buy these film adaptation rights. And the difference between that versus an outright sale of the rights first is that an option can be better from Lauren's perspective as a game developer, because it kind of gets like a bit of money in because you get an option fee at the outset. And it also means if the film never goes ahead, you keep the IP and you'll keep the option fee. And it also sort of lets you test how serious I am as a film producer. Because if Lauren was to sell me her adaptation rights outright, and I said, oh yeah, I'm going to make the film, and then I never do, that's gone. She can't then use those rights. She sold the adaptation rights and she can't sell them to anyone else. So now my game, Lauren's game, can never be made into a film, and I'm just sitting on these rights and I'm not doing anything with them. So you don't want that. So basically that's why we would always recommend going with an option approach, and then you need to tightly control the conditions of the option. So for example, the period of the option. How long is Lauren giving me to go and get this project off the ground before I have to say, oh, I'm non-exclusive, Lauren has the rights back? Typically we'd say 12 months. It is quite common to have the option period extend, but maybe just for another 6 months or another 12 months. And if it's going to extend, Lauren should say to me, for any extension, you've got to pay me another option extension fee. And so typically that fee will get higher and higher for the number of more extensions that I need to get from Lauren. And then basically you have to make sure in any option agreement that if it's not exercised, all of those exclusive rights for me to go and negotiate and potentially get it off the ground go back to Lauren. So she's fully free to go and then sell those adaptation rights to another film studio. The other thing you can do is also, even if you have the option being exercised, so say I then go, yep, I'm going to go ahead with this project, I'm going to make a film based on your game, I've got financing lined up, all good, I'm paying you now the purchase price for your rights. Lauren can still say to me, that's great, but you need to make sure this film actually does happen within a particular time period too. And that prevents you getting stuck as a game developer in what we call this perpetual development hell, where you just have these film projects just in this ongoing development stage and no one can do anything with that IP, the underlying IP for those film rights. That will be a bit of a tough negotiation. Me, as the production company, will not want to have a time frame put on me. I'll be like, well, I've bought my film rights. I'm now making this film. It's kind of up to me to get it done. But you can get some ground there. You can negotiate some sort of compromise. It might be like 5 to 7 years type of thing. So it's still a decent chunk of time. So if I'm going ahead now and I'm going to make the film based on Lauren's game, I need to exercise my option. So I need to pay Lauren a purchase price, and that means she'll either assign me the adaptation rights or grant me an exclusive license to those rights. And the choice of a license or assignment here is going to depend on, well, Lauren's long-term IP strategy, but also the strength of her IP, and also kind of what I want to do with it. As a film producer, I want the outright assignment of those film rights because I want to be able to do whatever I want to do with the film going forward. And if I just have a license to those film adaptation rights, I'm going to be tied to Lauren forever. And I might not want that. Sorry, Lauren. Yeah. So typically in New Zealand we'll see, in the film space, we'll see it's an assignment of the rights outright, and we'll talk a bit more about what that looks like as well.
So what kind of money am I talking about here, Kate? What am I getting?
Well, I mean, option fee is typically fairly nominal, so don't get too excited. It's basically about 2 to 5% of your ultimate purchase price, which is when I go ahead and exercise the option. So you kind of have to think about that initial option fee as a bit of a reservation fee. It's just the fee for me to reserve the rights to potentially go make the film. But as I said earlier, for those renewal of the option period, you can start to ratchet those fees up. The purchase price is where you get your big money, or bigger money. And that can be done as a lump sum on exercise of the option, or it might be split into milestones, which we see as more common. So, for example, I might pay Lauren a portion of that purchase price on the day I exercise the option. I then might pay the next lot on the first day of principal photography. So that's basically when the film starts shooting, and I might pay the third amount once I've finished shooting. But it can be also, sorry, I'm losing my voice. That purchase price could be also structured into like a flat fee, or based on a percentage of the film's production budget, which is what we would recommend, with a floor and a ceiling. So it won't be below this, it won't be above this, but it will be a percentage of the film's production, because that's kind of like then showing you're getting something in proportion to how potentially big the film will be, or what kind of quality of the film it will be. And then you need to think about negotiating your back-end participation, which is basically a percentage, like royalties, of any profits that are generated by the film. And there's a few tricks around this actually. So this is, when you're doing these agreements, just make sure you're getting good legal advice, because film production accounting is notorious at reducing down profit. So basically there's none, because they'll have the gross proceeds, or box office return come in, and then everyone starts taking off their commission. My marketing expenses for marketing the film, off that comes, off these things, all these things, and then it can get down to zero quite easily. So when you're looking at these agreements and you're trying to negotiate your percentage, your ongoing percentage of that profit participation, make sure you're talking to a lawyer about that. What else? I was going to say on the royalties part, if your game has got really distinctive style or characters and you think there's an opportunity for potential merch options that the film producer might make alongside the movie, or film sequels or spin-offs, you would want to also negotiate your rights in relation to those as well, to participate in any proceeds from those. Right, the other thing is that, oh no, we've covered that, that's great.
So Kate, how do I actually go about getting my film financed now?
Yeah, so typically, look, films require large budgets and external financing, and as game studio, sorry to say, you're probably unlikely to have the extra capital floating around. Or you may, some big ones may, but you're very unlikely to have the expertise to produce a film. Okay. Yeah, well, I don't know. I would say it would be, having done a number of film closings, the producers are, it's mammoth. A budget for a modest film in New Zealand is typically between kind of like 7 and 10 mil. Overseas is way higher. A Minecraft movie which was shot in New Zealand, they had a production budget of 150 mil, just to give you some idea. So these are big projects. And so typically the game studio wouldn't just go it alone. They'd be either working with the film producer, the film production company, and it would be the film production company, me in this situation, who would go out and finance the film, attach the cast, get all of the funding, and then look to sell it to a sales agent or distributor, or a whole rest of world streaming platform. And so basically though, as a game developer, you really need to have a good understanding how this whole process works, because you can kind of just get cut out really early on if you're not careful. And again, that's why I'd say just make sure you're getting some good legal advice through this. So in terms of getting a film financed in New Zealand, there's a number of options. Typically, for New Zealand, we have decent screen incentives, and so if your film can qualify as a New Zealand film, you can potentially qualify for a rebate, and that means all of the money you spend on making the film, if it's going to be shot in New Zealand, because you've partnered with me and I'm a New Zealand production company, or I'm Warner Brothers and I want to come and shoot it in New Zealand, all of the money I spend here, I'll get 40% back if I'm a New Zealand company, or if I'm Warner Brothers and I'm an offshore company, I'll get 20% of that back. And the way that works is that it provides a really good source of funding for the film. And there's some other things you do in the meantime to make sure you get access to that money before you finish the film, because you don't get the money from the rebate until you actually finish the film. There's also a number of different funding options from the Film Commission. There's production funding, so your film being produced, you can get funding up to 2.5 mil. Even if you're doing early script development, or kind of trying to increase talent capability through directors and script writers and things like that, there's a whole lot of funds for that. And even if you need to get a distributor on board to go and sell your film, to go and market it, distribute it, there's even funding to help that happen as well. So there's actually some really good options. The thing as the game developer, from Lauren's perspective as game developer here, you want to know about how all this works, because all of these funding and all of these financing options will have conditions attached to it. And often they can be like, well, if you're going to get this funding, then these conditions have to be met. And for example, the Film Commission will want to have a say in terms of potentially who's involved in the film, how the Film Commission will recoup its investment, so how it will get its money back, and things like that. And that can all affect you as the game developer, as the underlying IP owner, and your leverage and your participation in the upside of the film as well. The other thing is that we have official co-productions in New Zealand, and this basically means that we, New Zealand, have agreed with other countries that if a film project qualifies for screen incentives in each country, then they can get them in both countries, which is awesome, because then you can just make a better film, because you can access more funding and get a bigger budget and deliver something better. This is a bit of a technical test. So again, if you're coming alongside a film producer as a game developer, you want to be working with lawyers through this. As part of a co-production process, you have to agree how each film producer can use the IP in which country. So, for example, we do a lot of Australia, New Zealand co-productions, Canada, New Zealand co-productions. And if we're doing one of those, that means me as a New Zealand film producer has to agree with the Canadian film producer how each of us are going to use the IP. For Lauren, as a game IP owner, she's going to want to know that, because if she wants to do sequels to her game, not the film, she's going to want to know what's happening in Canada with the movie, because that could also impact what she's doing in New Zealand with her game. So there's just some things to work through there. How are we going for time? Okay, good.
So Kate, what do I need to watch out for? I don't want my brand, to be damaged as part of the film.
Yeah, good question. It's really relevant. And we've seen how this can affect, I don't know if any of you guys went to the Minecraft session yesterday, but the Weta Effects supervisor who worked on that had said that when they first released the first trailer of the Minecraft movie trailer, the user numbers for the Minecraft game went down. And by the time they did a new trailer, the second trailer, numbers went up, and then by the time they released the movie, numbers for the Minecraft game soared. So it's obviously a really important consideration. And the thing about it is that, games are often kind of sprawling in narrative and interactive, right? Whereas films are typically linear and time-bound, and they need to be time-bound because that's kind of the condition of some of your ability to commercialise a film. No one wants to sit through a 4-hour film. Well, I don't. And so when you have to take a game story and characters to a kind of 2-hour screenplay, that's an artistic challenge, right? And so there's a risk that the film could disappoint fans if it diverges too much from the game, and there's a risk that the film doesn't, generate new audiences, which is sort of the purpose, if it stays too faithful to the game. So it's maintaining the essence of the game is a real skill. And it requires, collaboration on the script, the vision, etc. And as we say, Lauren is the game developer. She's going to want to protect her game's world. And me, as a film producer, I want to bring out a film that's going to work commercially and it's going to sell well. So striking that right balance between creative control is crucial. So there's a couple of things to think about here. Just first of all, credits. That's not so much about creative control, but that's just to let you know that there's no kind of automatic right when you've got a film for there to be a credit given to Lauren as game developer. So she should really negotiate that up front with the film producer. And if Lauren and her team are contributing to the film's production, so maybe you might be getting involved in kind of co-writing the script or serving as an executive producer on the film, you should be negotiating appropriate credits and fees for this. Don't leave this sort of stuff on the table. Having these credits are really important for career purposes and your value and your brand, particularly in the film space going forward. In terms of that creative control aspect that we're talking about just before and approvals, that's the trickiest thing to negotiate. And essentially that's going to come down to how strong your IP is, your game IP is. So the more beloved your game and the higher the user numbers, the more leverage Lauren's going to have to be able to negotiate over creative elements of the film that's based on the game. Often it will be a middle ground where there's kind of consultation rights, but Lauren wouldn't have a final veto right. But if she does have really, really great IP and you've got a lot of leverage, you can negotiate some approval rights. The other thing you can do, if you don't have that leverage to negotiate approval rights so much, you can at least negotiate no-go points. So no-go themes. So for example, if you don't want the film adaptation to include extreme, political messaging, perhaps, or extreme gore or something that's not in the game, it's not part of your genre of your game, then you can put that in writing. But overall, basically, the key takeaway of this slide, or this sort of section, is to just make sure that when you are negotiating your film deal, just make sure nothing hamstrings your ability to make future games based on your game IP. So sequels, spin-off games, any DLC. So you want to make sure you're keeping your game rights really separate from what's been agreed with your sale of the film adaptation rights. And that's when you should also get a lawyer, to check all through these sorts of things. Like there'll be reserved rights and you need to make sure that they have the things you need to keep being, so you can still keep making your games. We are pretty much done, actually. So I think we're a few minutes early, but we've got time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free. The other thing is I'm doing the drop-in clinic out there for the next hour. So if anyone has more specific questions on the film side and in particular, feel free to come and ask us. Yeah. Hi.
Just with regards to IPs or, say, for example, like transferring from from games to films, and who has the greater amount of creative control.
Yep.
I'm just wondering how that sort of weighting in terms of like renown or how well known it is, like how is that qualified, or is that more of just a social circle thing?
It's more just a negotiation point. So it's basically how much power do you have to negotiate on the creative control of the film. So the film itself will be a new copyright work. So there'll be new IP that's created by the film, even though it's based on your game IP. And so for me as the film producer, I want to have complete control over what I create as the film, because I want to do it in a way that I think is going to sell the best or, sell the most. And you as game developer want to make sure that's not going to impact your game and the future of your game and your brand and your vision, etc. If you've got a really well-selling game, you come to the table when you have to negotiate this with me with more power. Because I want your IP, your game IP, because it's doing so well. And I think, well, if I can make a film based on your strong IP and your following and your community and your group of fans and, that sort of thing, then I'm going to have less ability to say, oh, you've got to hand it all over to me and just let me run with it. So it's actually more about your respective negotiating stance. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Anyone else got any questions? Oh, Wade, hi.
How's it going? Good job.
Good.
Good job. Quick question on the royalties you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of a general range that you see, or is it
Yeah.
really just depending on leverage?
I do. There's a for back-end position like that. So basically how it would work for films is that you've got a whole lot of external investors who've come in to help finance the film, and you'll have some public funders in there, like, for example, the Film Commission. And the way everyone gets their money back is to obviously take a share of the proceeds of the film. And until everyone's got their money back, it's not until that happens that you then move into a profit position. And like you as a game developer would only be able to participate, like have a position in that, in the profit position. So you're so far down the chain already, right? And then you've got a whole lot of other people who are in there too. So like typically for a film deal, you'll have the key cast, so a big name actor would get a profit position too. The director might be able to negotiate that as well, sometimes the writers. And you as the underlying game IP owner, that's where you would sit in kind of that group. But basically you're sort of looking at about a 5% position. Yeah, 5 to 8%. Yeah.
Thank you. And just one more while we're here.
Yeah.
You talked about doing that due diligence on your IP position and checking that you got chain of title of everything. Is that something you do with your lawyer, or are there kind of specialists who do that from the technical side? What should someone go and do they just go talk to you guys?
Yeah, good question. Typically that is done by a lawyer, and then they would just point out any gaps, and then you could go back and then talk to whoever you need to talk to or look at it from a more technical side. But there's kind of a whole lot of agreements that we would expect to review for a chain of title review. And it doesn't need to be expensive. You can get a fixed price from any production lawyer to do that. And again, that's really important to do, because when you then go to sell your film rights, they'll do that again, not only just on, they won't do it across, they'll look at your game IP, chain of title, but they also look at a whole lot of other chain of title as well. So any script that's written, like each version of the script, any other kind of work that's gone into early stage development of the film, all of that gets looked at from another chain of title review. And so your game IP chain of title just sits as kind of like the first cab off the rank in that process.
And have you got any good stories of when you've done that process and then someone is going, no, I won't sign over my things unless you give me $1 million or whatever, and you've got to kind of...
Oh, no, because generally we do it at the outset. We do the review before we get too far down the chain. But there was one, we've got a film, there's a film coming out soon. I probably can't actually say which one it is, but it's a New Zealand story, and it's based on a real life event in New Zealand. And so they had wanted, the producers of the film had got the two key people who are involved in the story to obviously give them an option to tell their story. And the option, as I said in our presentation, had a time period that meant if the film wasn't actually produced, that option would lapse. And it took quite a long time for the producers to get financed and get funding and get it approved. And at the point that they were going to get all of the investors in, we had looked at it and we were like, hey, you actually don't have this option anymore, it's lapsed. So that was a real problem. So then the producers had to scramble and get it renewed, and then on the terms of which they could exercise the option too. And that was lucky that the two people were happy to give them a new option or a renewal. They didn't have to. Yeah. So that would have derailed the whole project. Yeah.
Yeah, and from a general point of view, I think that sort of thing can go to potentially the willingness of producers to get involved if you don't have a clear, something that they can actually due diligence to make sure that it is a chain of title. And that will potentially be the point in time when you do get those people putting their hand up. So that goes back to getting your documentation right at the outset, because otherwise it might undermine the value of what you have to offer.
Yeah, there's a few more war stories of that effect as well. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day here. Nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. Thanks.